Hi, everyone. I'm the moderator today, Cathy Leamy. I'm a medical cartoonist with a day job in healthcare IT, and I'm going to start sharing some slides. All right, there we go. And so today I'm going to be talking with 4 creators whose works fall into the graphic medicine territory. We're talking with Liz Bolduc Sux, Erin Cole, Tatiana Gill, and Lilly Taing. But first, 2 things. Number 1, I'd like to say thank you so much to LadiesCon for hosting. This is such a great time, and I'm so glad that the show could still go on this year despite everything. I'd like to say thank you to my co-organizer, Matthew Noe, medical librarian, for his behind-the-scenes work on this panel. And number 2, for anybody who's learning about graphic medicine for the first time, I'd just like to do a quick skim over what graphic medicine even is. So the term graphic medicine was coined by Dr. Ian Williams, and my best way of describing it is just, there's the world of comics, there's the world of healthcare and medicine of the body, and graphic medicine is anytime those 2 things come together. So a lot of what that is actually just making comics. There are plenty of comics out there by people with certain health conditions, people who've had experiences, people going through illness and wellness. There's a lot of autobio and memoir, especially people who've been through something and they want to talk about it. It could be the patient themselves, or it could be also like family or caretakers. And there's also not just the people who are living with something, but also healthcare providers as well. Doctors and nurses make a lot of comics. There are a lot of people on Twitter making comics, like Dr. Mike Natter, and even medical journals like the Annals of Internal Medicine are publishing this stuff. And another way that this kind of thing pops up is in health education and public health comics, like this comic, No Ordinary Flu, about pandemic awareness, which was published by King County in Seattle Public Health actually several years ago, and is kind of terrifyingly timely right now. I would recommend reading it. It's pretty good. Yeesh. So, but we're not just talking necessarily about just making comics. We're also talking about using those comics, especially as teaching tools for people who work in healthcare. So we're talking maybe doctors and nurses reading those memoirs that I just mentioned for empathy and to better understand what patients are going through. There are also med school classes where the med school students themselves make comics, and this is improving their communication skills and attention to detail. And there's a lot of overlap with the fields of medical humanities and narrative medicine. And beyond just kind of using the comics and making them, there's also a lot of people actually analyzing the comics. Like a lot of comics that we know, researchers are looking at them to see how health and medicine are depicted and kind of what we can learn from that and what messages are sent. And then finally, there's actually a big role for librarians. There's a lot of them who are very active in graphic medicine. They're out there kind of making sure actually that these works get into people's hands in the first place and they're circulated and people are learning from them. So that covers very fast overview of what we're talking about when we say graphic medicine. And now I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. And I'm going to click through some slides and show a few bits of their work. We're going to start with Liz Bolduc Sux. Take it away, Liz.
Hello. Hi. So my name is Liz, and I draw, write, publish comics under the name Liz Sux. And so that was like a self-deprecating joke in college that I just took and ran. So yeah, so that's who I am. If you want to click to the next slide. And so I started drawing, I'll just give like a quick overview. I started drawing about 7 years ago about comics, and a lot of it was focused on kind of like my depression at that time, the anxiety, family, and like the therapy sessions I was going through. Over time, I realized there were some themes that were really more dominant than others, and that turned out to be like the theme of family and my own personal wellness and how those relationships affected my mental health. These are my comics as they look today. So this is a panel from my new series, Cast Pearls Before Swine. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this series is about different moments throughout my life, intertwining religion and spirituality and the loss of that, as well as my family and the impact on my mental health that it had, whether it was positive or negative. It goes deeper into those different experiences and kind of process it and then keep going. So, and if you want, yeah, so this is another slide from it. It says, I would like to think I was trying to find a way to survive. So definitely I use this, I use drawing comics as a way to process my own emotions and just like continue to keep doing that work. And then next slide, please. And I also wanted to show that these comics that I've been working on, which are available on my Instagram, my website, and on patreon.com, all things you can find by going to my website. And these comics are focused on environmental justice and environmental racism. I bring these up especially because they are so intertwined with the health of humans. And so both of these are from different comics. One's focusing on air pollution and Cancer Alley, and then the other one is talking about a case in Florida of sugarcane fires and how that also affects the air. All things that we are actively doing, actively seeing in our country, and it is having negative and awful effects on the people who live in that area. And so I wanted to take time to move outwards of myself and focus on some other health issues that are happening. So that's who I am.
Cool, thanks, Liz. And just to let everybody know, there's going to be a slide at the very end of this panel with the links and everything for checking out all of these, all of the panelists' work. So stick around to the end for pointers about where to go next and where to find all this stuff. So then next up, we've got B. Erin Cole.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. So my name is B. Erin Cole. I'm a historian and a cartoonist. And the stuff I'm going to talk about today is comics that I do basically under the moniker Little Brain Comics. And the little blob character you see is a brain, and that brain's name is Little Brain. So next slide. So I created Little Brain about 4 years ago, which is also about the same time that I suffered a traumatic brain injury. So Little Brain Comics were actually, I started drawing them for myself as a way to kind of explain what was going on with my brain injury, because I was having issues with writing, issues with like talking. So, but my like drawing skills were like I'm like, here's something I can do. So what you see here is actually one of the earliest actual comics I did. I did this for a 24-hour comics day 4 years ago. So just kind of trying to show like, here's like some of the things that you're living through if you're dealing with a brain injury. So next slide. So I did these for myself and my family, but I also started sharing them on Instagram and in, there's a couple of big Facebook groups for people with this, what we call post-concussion syndrome, which is like basically like the concussion that never goes away. So I got a lot of feedback. People kept telling me how helpful they were. They loved seeing themselves in my little pink blob. So I just kind of started going with it. And this is something I did about 2 years ago. It's kind of a zine, and it's also available online. It's just like a kind of a guide to going through post-concussion syndrome. And I created it for caregivers and friends of people with PCS, but a lot of people have kind of used it. They've given it to their doctors and things like that. Just kind of talking about some of the common symptoms, because this is, again, something that there's actually not a lot of like good material out there on like long-term, like mild brain injury. So next slide. So as my brain injury has gotten better, I've also like, Little Brain also talks a lot about mental health and little mental states. So I do a lot of work on Instagram of talking about like anxiety, talking about kind of neural fatigue, doing other things. So these are two these are two things I've drawn that have been like shared a whole bunch of times. I think we can all like relate to braining too much today, especially now. We all have too many things to think about. And then next slide. And then I'm just, again, with like 2020 is a year of a lot of mental health challenges. So I've been doing a lot of more comics to talk about my experience with like mental health, anxiety. I got furloughed from my job this year and have coming back. So this is one of the I was doing like furlough and quarantine diary comics. And this is one of just like little brain enveloped in fog, turning into like pure panic. I mean, one thing I really like about this character is that it's incredibly plastic and it can become kind of anything. So so there's something about drawing in that kind of traditional cartoony style that works really well for, I think, healthcare comics and kind of conveying emotions. And so anyway, so that is like, I post stuff on Instagram a lot, and I'm starting a new comics newsletter as well. So all right.
Cool. Glad to hear it, Anne. And then next up, we've got Tatiana Gill.
Hi, thanks, Tatiana, and I make comics, autobiographical comics about my own healthcare experiences or health issues, and then I also do some comics for like my county public health program. So yeah, I guess we can just go on to the next slide. Yeah, here's one about, this is autobiographical about me at my therapist's. And this is kind of about my continuing comics about anxiety and depression. Next slide. And then I've done comics about my own reproductive health and healthcare. And then that has morphed into also doing, just doing stuff about reproductive health rights, healthcare rights and stuff. And I'm a recovering alcoholic, and so I've done a lot of comics about sort of what it was like as an alcoholic and the difference now that I'm in recovery. And this is a comic about going to the ER and my perspective as a addict going in, I guess. Next slide. And then here are some of the comics I've done for Seattle King County Public Health, which is actually the No Ordinary Flu. There's a great graphic medicine person at, working there, Meredith Lee Volmer, and she commissioned that No Ordinary Flu comic and this one. And these are about locking up your medications so that, or actually there's two here. Okay, so one is interviewing at-risk clients who are waiting for healthcare and doing comics about their issues. And then that actually inspired these comics for King County Health that were don't hang on to your medication, lock it up, sort of public service announcements. So I do, sort of comics about myself, but also other people's stories sometimes. Thanks.
Thank you, Tatiana. And finally, we have Lilly Taing.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this panel. Thank you, Cathy, again, for inviting me. And thank you for the panelists for all sharing your experiences so far. So my name is Lilly Taing. My pronouns are she and her. And I am a comics artist and illustrator. And my day job is as a third-year medical student at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. And generally speaking, I think art is a safe place for everyone to explore and reflect on their experiences, but can also be used as a tool for like advocacy and social change. So that's kind of where I got my start in graphic medicine. And you can click on the next slide. And so one of the first projects I worked on was with Brittany Mostiller, who was the director of the Chicago Abortion Fund. And I worked with her to illustrate her story about coming to decide to get an abortion, and ultimately her journey to become the director of the Chicago Abortion Fund in the project Comics for Choice, an anthology about abortion stories, the history and politics behind it. And then I had also worked with BenCon to illustrate their story about how it feels to live with ADHD, and another anthology called Corpus, which was about all these different narratives about illness experiences. And you can click on the next slide. And then this one was our Womanly magazine, which is another literary publication that's trying to make health information more accessible to women and non-binary people. And this was for their issue on stress. So I was trying to capture the feeling of stress and taking time to, like, the ways to respond to stress. And you can click on the next slide. And this one are two images from a comic I personally drew after my white coat ceremony. And I was reflecting on the surreal experience of having a white coat ceremony, and the background that I come from was like of 2 generations of refugees. And I feel like that experience also isn't very well represented in medicine, as I've come to realize as I progress through my education. So this is kind of my general experience and background in graphic medicine. Yep.
Great, thank you all so much. And now we're going to switch over to discussion questions. And just to let everybody know, sorry about this, we are pressed for time, so we will not be doing audience Q&A. But at the very end, as I mentioned, I'll be listing everybody's Twitter handles and all the ways to get in touch with us. So please feel free to continue the conversation on all those different channels besides this one when we're done. So great. Thank you all for those introductions. You all do some fascinating work. And so kind of just right out the gate, and let's start with Liz for this one. How did you come to make comics about health? And are they for you or for an audience?
Yeah, I really like this question because it really makes me realize that what I have been doing my entire comic time career has been contributing to the idea, the concept of graphic medicine. Like when I first started drawing comics about myself and my experience, it was really just a way to kind of like be a source of like an outlet for myself. Everything I was doing, it was so directly for myself. And then when I started realizing like this could be shared in a different context, or maybe I can like share these experiences to connect with other people. It was something that I immediately started drawing, like how, you know, trying different medications was making me feel, or my therapy sessions and how those were going, and, you know, like what that experience and relationship with that therapist at that time was like. So it was all of these like little bits coming together for me to then realize about 2.5 years ago that like, oh, this is like graphic medicine. Like once I had a term to apply to it, it just like everything clicked. And I would say my work has definitely evolved to definitely gear more towards still coming from a place that is healing for me, but it's now kind of broken into this different pathway of I want other people to read these stories, especially about like my one perspective of my family and how that has affected me, and like their mental health affects myself and others, etc. How all of this familial grief and trauma can shape who you are, and it doesn't mean the other person has to directly like experience that or understand that, but I do draw for others to relate to at this point. So yeah, that's how I feel.
I guess I'll just open it up to whoever wants to grab that question and run with it next. Or I can call on people. Be Erin Cole.
Oh my God. As I mentioned in my presentation, I started drawing my comics for me, and for kind of a, you know, basically to communicate to my family and friends, here's what's going on. And I never really intended for them to have an audience beyond that. But as, you know, as more and more people were just like, hey, I really like seeing, you know, I kind of see myself in this experience. You know, and especially since I draw in a really simple style, which is, again, for people who have brain injuries, like that's actually very appealing. You know, I was just like, oh, you know, wait, I have an audience now, which is something I never actually like thought would actually happen with any of my comics. So which is really weird. So now I am actually, you know, more drawing them for an audience, although I always, you know, try to very much, you know, anchor things in my own experience. This is my experience with this. This is not necessarily your experience with this, but maybe this can help you. So it is kind of weird to think about like how, you know, when I'm drawing something and I'm trying to think about like, I'm drawing this little cute brain, is it for me or for somebody else? And like, you know, there's just this kind of internal monologue that goes on when I'm drawing these things. And, you know, sometimes I just don't really know who the audience is for. It's just coming out. So.
And to add to that, like, definitely, I think there's this kind of like shift. Like when I first started drawing, I was just like, do I want other people to see this? And I think as people, if people who are listening to this want to draw comics about their own experiences, or maybe like they haven't thought about it, maybe they want to, wherever you are at, definitely, I always try to like remind myself and remind others, like, you don't have to share literally anything. Like, you could take what I'm saying will be like, all of us don't feel like you do have to share for other people. Definitely something that like you could just create these pieces of work in any level and be like, yes, this is graphic medicine and this is for myself.
I think I started originally just for me because, you know, the story, I had to tell my story. It felt compelled to. But I think there was definitely you know, a notion that I was going to share it, that I wasn't going to just bury it. But yeah, I've actually been recently, like I've been delving into some childhood stuff, and I was sort of debating whether or not to tell like my parents' stories along with my own, because their stories affected my story. And so it was interesting. I actually wound up with the book I'm trying to put together now, leaving out their stories. I was like, maybe that's a later book where I get more granular. But then also with audience, you know, if I draw something for me and post it and there's a big audience reaction, I'm definitely thinking about that the next time. So yeah, it's still an influence, even though I think, you know, ultimately I'm not going to draw something that I don't care about. Yeah.
I agree with what everyone's been saying, and I feel like the process of making art is very like cathartic and healing. It's like there's that aspect of it's for you where you're sharing your experiences, but also if like someone else is reading it and can also connect to it and also relate to it, it's always a really nice feeling, especially when they tell you. And like, for example, that comic about my experience, like in reflecting on my past experience during my white coat ceremony, some of my classmates had seen and also had reached out to me to tell me like how meaningful it was that that experience was captured and they had also related to it. So even like the act of making it is nice, and even if you don't share it, if you like do share it and someone else can connect to it, it's a very nice thing.
Awesome. That actually leads really nicely into my next question, which is kind of related. Well, then how is making these comics, what kind of effect has it had on you, if any? Like, has it changed how you think about the condition that you're depicting, or maybe how you approach healthcare? And why don't we start that one with Erin?
So I think like making these comics has had an interesting effect on me. Again, because it like I've been drawing comics my whole life, but you know, having a brain injury means I had to really change the way that I do a lot of things. And as I mentioned in my intro, like my visual facilities were really like not very affected by my ability to kind of like read and write. And again, like I'm a historian and I work in a museum, which is all about reading and writing. So the thing is like really kind of realizing that I had to kind of work with what I had. And I think drawing has really helped me deal with the brain injury in ways that are constructive and productive, in ways that, you know, kind of like, you know, like things are different now, but that doesn't mean things are bad. So, and it's also kind of given me like, you know, like I'm like, I've kind of started working more in doing like kind of history and other things in comics form. So it's kind of like it kind of opened, like doing these comics kind of opened a door that probably wouldn't have been there before. It also kind of helped me with like this long problem I've had of drawing myself, because like, as we all know, drawing ourselves is really kind of, can be really kind of stressful. So, and I've always struggled with how to do this, but it turns out like a pink, like amorphous brain blob is like the best way to draw myself. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can speak to how it has shifted my perspective, especially when it comes to healthcare and specifically mental health within like the therapy world. I have utilized, you know, like say I've drawn a comic, I have literally like put it into a zine and printed it. I will then bring, you know, those originals or those like mini zines to my therapist that I am seeing. And, you know, it can be in so many different lenses, because sometimes I'm like, look, like I did something and I think it's cool and I want you to see, but also it's a lot of me being like, hey, here's this really vulnerable thing that like we've talked about many times, but you know what, like here's another layer to it. And like here I am directing the conversation, like owning this personal feeling, and I want to share it with you because I respect you as a professional. It's kind of like it really helps, you know, standing up for myself in this field. I don't know, I would be very interested in trying this out in another perspective of like drawing in different medicine or injury or things like that, and bringing it to maybe like a doctor. I have not done that, but using comics with my therapist has only made our connection stronger, because she sees another level of something that maybe she was not able to talk about or pull from me in our sessions. So
I think it's affected me a lot, because I think the further I get into it, because like recently I wanted to do a comic about the head medications I'd taken throughout my life, the psychiatric medications I've taken throughout my life. And I realized I couldn't remember a lot of them, so I went into some medical records, and those medical records revealed all kinds of things I do not remember, especially from my my active alcoholic years. And so it was really interesting, and it really changed how I was thinking about my psychiatric medication, because to just sort of see this huge overview that really I would have, it's like, why didn't I do that years ago? But I just, you just sort of take it one problem at a time, and it's rare for me to like look at the whole like lifetime picture. But the comic that I wanted to draw inspired, me basically taking a more holistic view of my own healthcare. And I think a lot of times too, as I'm sort of struggling to like portray something in a story form, a lot of times like a narrative will come to light that I didn't see before.
Yeah, I think since a lot of my graphic medicine work has been like working with writers about reflecting their experiences, I always think like it makes me reflect the process when I'm making art. It reflects a lot on like whether it's appropriate for me to be the one doing it, or how well I'm accurately portraying their work to the most like authentic level that they want as well. And then when that's me drawing about my experience, I always like reflect on whether this is an accurate experience of my work. I sometimes like wonder whether, or I guess it's like I tend to engage in like gatekeeping of myself, whether it's like this is a relatable experience, but I don't recommend that anyone, if you want to create art and like share your experience, you shouldn't be gatekeeping yourself. And there's plenty of room in like the community and graphic medicine in general for you to share your individual experience.
Wow, thanks. Lily, I would actually love to call on you to kind of continue some of the
Sure.
same thoughts with the next question. The question I was going to ask is that some people in the graphic medicine community, sometimes they raise concerns about medical accuracy in comics as a concern of theirs. And like it's kind of related to what you were saying, maybe not so much about the authenticity, but even just the medical accuracy aspect. Do you have thoughts on that?
I'm not too familiar with the issue, but yeah, I feel like in general, everyone's experience is so unique. Even like if you have, even if a group of people might have the same kind of condition or come from similar backgrounds, everyone's experience is so unique and different that even just having more voices helps give you a better picture and sense of how people like their lived experiences. So as in terms of medical accuracy, it feels like in terms of no, I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I always appreciate having just more experiences and not trying to set as many barriers to people sharing what they're going through and living through.
Yeah, for sure. I think, so my previous job was working within a medical library for a graduate school. And so it was something that, and that specific position was new to me. And it was definitely interesting to see how, because I was the one bringing up graphic medicine as like, here's something that we really should be looking into and providing for this library. Like there is a plethora of knowledge. Like we are seeing people actively do the work. And it was definitely a challenge, I would say, to kind of challenge people who may have been in these specific professor, teacher, academic roles, to kind of open up that mindset a bit more and see like the field of writing down, drawing your personal medical, health experiences should not be devalued because it may not be textbook symptoms or textbook cures. Whatever it has been, like it is time to expand on that so much more than what we have been doing. And so although I don't work in that position anymore, that is something that like is in my focus as I like go forward and trying to find a place where I can really try to like remind people that like the human experience is incredibly valid. And I mean, like Lily was saying, like the more experiences there are, it really is like more beneficial, because we're all not going to relate to exactly to other people's experiences, but there's going to be that one person who reads that one, story and be like, well, heck, this is literally what I've been going through. Now I can bring it to my doctor and say, look, this is what I'm dealing with. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking it can depend on the audience too. Like when I'm making an account of my medical issues or medical journey, I would hope that the reader wouldn't take it as medical fact. Although, it is a fact for me, like, yeah, it's, I'm not a doctor. So I don't want to go on as like, this is a fact, this is just my experience. And the same, I think, with a lot of comics I do where like I interview a patient. It's I feel like it's assumed that this is a person's story and that we, you know, just like anyone telling us, you know, oh, use baking soda for your wart or something, you know, you're like, oh, maybe I'll try it. But then again, it's not like my doctor told me to do it. But then I was thinking like, well, for a public health comic, like by the public health department, there's a more gravity there. I would hate to put in something misleading in there because it's like it's coming from a health authority. And so I think I would assume something like that was true, was facts. So yeah.
So I have, you know, so one of the comics I showed in my slideshow was something I created specifically for patients and caregivers and things like that. But I do preface it with saying, like, first off, I'm not a doctor and I'm really not your doctor. And just saying like, hey, all of this is from my own point of view and things like that. And because I'm dealing, like, brain injury is so interior, you know, that it's, you know, and it's so sometimes hard to disentangle from just depression or other things. You know, it's very focused on interior states. And so it's as accurate to meet my experience as I can make it, you know, and I did do a lot of other research, and there's a whole list of resources at the end of that comic. But, you know, at the same time, I know that, you know, any other person can read it and they're like, well, I have this symptom, but the rest of this, I don't even know what this is. So, so trying to straddle that between, like, I'm trying to make something that's useful, that people have found useful and have given to their doctors, versus like, you know, I haven't really studied this. I'm just a person with a weird brain. So it's kind of, you know, like, but at the same time, there's so little like support for like brain injuries that I think people are just like looking for anything. And that's, you know, I have to think about the responsibility of that too.
Wow. Time is flying. We're down to our last 5 minutes. So, we're down to our last question too, which actually touches on something that Liz brought up and something I mentioned at the beginning during my quick intro. Like, comics like these are often used for discussion topics for healthcare providers, or they might be used in a library or a classroom. And so, do you know if any of your comics are used like this? And would you want them to be? And let's kick that question off with Tatiana.
Yes, I would love them to be used in, among healthcare providers or in classrooms. I know that, some of my comics on, addiction recovery. My therapist is an addiction recovery specialist, so she bought some of my zines. She gives them to her other clients, so that's really exciting for me. And also, I did a comic about getting birth control from my local, like, free or, cheaper community clinic, and sent that to the doctors that, and it was sort of like, for some reason, in this case, I got like a comedy team, doctor and medical student. So it was a very funny experience. And so I made the comic kind of out of gratitude, but I sent it to them. Well, they shared it with like the listservs that they're on. And, I heard through the grapevine that this was going around to many medical providers, and, they were enjoying it because it was sort of half anecdote, half the real stuff that happens at the clinic. So, yeah, I love that. I don't have much influence in the medical field as just, a patient. So that's always really exciting to me.
I can.
Yep, there we go. Who's going to pick it up next? Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure no one else, those social cues, that we're missing. So definitely, I do know that some of my comics are within different libraries. I know some of my older work is at the Somerville Public Library, if you live near or around Boston, Massachusetts. So Somerville would have that. And then I remember, I think the biggest thing that was like a big moment in my life, was like, even when my still current therapist was like, can I buy one of your comics to have on, you know, the coffee table for when people come in. Makes me sob because she's an amazing person, and that was a really good experience to be able to kind of share that, and then now know that it can be seen by other people, you know, within the community. I and even just like saying that has now kind of like sparked that idea, or like, I think more therapists could benefit from the idea of using more of these mental health specific comics and or physical health comics, you know, like in their coffee table spread, on their bookshelves, loaning them out. You know, I still go into like the waiting room in there. Well, not anymore, but I used to go into the waiting room and, you know, see all of the like old, like 70s, 80s textbooks on psychology. And now there is like such a strong, you know, collection of stories of different experiences. And I think it would be really, really awesome to, you know, step in and be able to be recommended a comic by your therapist, or, you know, because you can go to the library, you can buy your own comics or buy comics, but having that extra layer, I think that would be really awesome.
Cool. So we've got 2 minutes left. I definitely want to hear from the 2 remaining people who haven't talked yet, but I'm also going to just throw the slide up with everybody's info and with resources for where you can find out more about graphic medicine. And also one of those places is swing on by my Twitter feed, Metro Kitty, where I'm going to be tweeting a whole bunch of stuff, including titles and things from my intro slide. So, all right, please continue where we left off.
I know that my stuff has been used in classrooms, and it's in some libraries, and when I hand sell stuff at Zine Fest, which is usually how I figure out who's reading my stuff, like I've had people like, oh, I work in a neurologist's office, I'm gonna buy like 5 or 6 of these and hand them out. So yay.
Yeah, I don't know if my work has been personally used in the classroom or any like library. That would be cool.
Awesome. All right. On that note, I've got 11:45 on my clock. So thank you so much to all the panelists for chatting today. That was really cool and really insightful. And I kind of want to go make some comics right now. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much to everybody who attended. Thank you so much to LadiesCon. And all right. See you all somewhere else on the internet. Enjoy the rest of your day.